Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I've worked over the past 18 months as Labour's energy spokesperson. I relinquished that role yesterday to my colleague Nanaia Mahuta, whom I wish all the best in the role. And I also want to wish Chris Hipkins well as the Associate Energy Spokesperson, because he's continuing in that role and he's done an excellent job.
Full of energy.
And if anybody needed any evidence of his energy and commitment to the portfolio, they would need to look no further than the work that he's done to get this bill introduced to the House. I just want to deal with some of the myths that were plentiful in the speech that we've just heard, because what the Minister didn't understand, it's pretty obvious, is that the bill only applies to baseload generation, and it doesn't apply to any generation that is actually as efficient as renewables generation. So the two examples that the Minister used in his speech were simply not caught by the legislation that is proposed by my colleague, and it shows the level and the lack of analysis on that side of the House that's gone into the thinking behind the decision to oppose this legislation. Now, see, what this bill does is it reintroduces the 10-year restriction that Labour enacted as part of its emissions trading scheme in 2008. And Sarah, I chaired the Finance and Expenditure Committee that heard submissions on that bill, and it's quite clear to me, having heard the industry in particular on the legislation, that the restriction is the only meaningful way to ensure that the government will give preference to renewable energy sources, and the scrapping of this preference under urgency by the government within a month or so of it coming into office is eloquent testament to its disregard for New Zealand's environment. So we back this bill because we understand the need for New Zealand to maximise our existing renewable energy advantage. Already we derive between 2/3 and 3/4 of our electricity generation from renewables, and whether it's 2/3 or 3/4 depends on the time of the year, whether we're talking about base load or peaking capacity, clearly concepts that the Minister's not familiar with. But Sarah, I was proud to have been a director of Meridian Energy when that company made a decision to go 100% renewable, when the company made the commitment to build the Te Apiti wind farm and then the West Wind project and others. And it's great to see other companies, for example, Mighty River Power, going into the geothermal business in a big way, and also others looking at concepts like tidal power, because these technologies represent the pathway toward getting to 90% baseload generation and beyond. They do show that in the area of electricity generation we can have the growth we need in generation capacity while enhancing our environment. And it's a tragedy, sir, that Jerry Brownlee appears to have shelved the New Zealand energy strategy, because that document very carefully sets out the pathway by which we'd achieve the 90% target by 2025 by retiring inefficient old fossil-fuelled plants. Mrs Collins is bored because she doesn't like the environment. But for those of us that care about these things, I do commend that document to her. It would be really good if she were to read the document and to see that it does set out that pathway, and it's a shame that Jerry Brownlee's just put it on the shelf and is ignoring it. So as well as preserving security of supply and supporting the environment, this bill would allow New Zealand to make significant strides towards actually lowering our country's greenhouse gas emissions, something the current government has abandoned any intention of doing, and it was quite frank about that at the climate conference in Bonn last week. We just have to focus on developing more renewable forms of electricity instead of burning more and more fossil fuels. And Sarah, I'm yet to hear a plausible justification from the government as to why it's voting this bill down. Its proposals aren't radical. It recognises the importance of security of supply. It has sensible exemption provisions for situations like a power crisis. Mrs Collins says, why didn't we do it in 9 years? She's obviously missed the point that we did exactly this and that her government voted to repeal it. She obviously forgot about voting for it. So it's all very well, sir, for Jerry Brownlee to stand up, Nathan Guy to stand up and aspire to having 90% of our energy generated by renewables, but their words need to be backed up by action, and that hasn't been forthcoming, sir, so far. If the government has any desire to be serious about this goal, it should support this bill.